So I grew up as an identical twin, which of course made me an expert at spotting favoritism. When I became a psychologist, though, I began to notice favoritism of a different kind, and that is how much more we value the body than we do the mind. A while ago, I was visiting friends when their 5-year-old was getting ready for bed. He was standing on a stool by the sink, brushing his teeth, when he slipped and scratched his leg when he fell. He cried for a minute, but then he got back up on the stool and reached out for a bandage so he could put one on his cut. Now, this kid could barely tie his shoelaces, but he already knew that you have to cover a cut so it doesn't get infected, and you have to care for your teeth by brushing twice a day. We all know how to maintain our physical health and how to practice dental hygiene. We know it at 5 years old. But what do we know about maintaining our psychological health? Nothing. What do we teach our children about emotional first aid? Nothing. How is it we spend more time taking care of our teeth than we do our mind? After all, we sustain psychological injuries in life just as often as we do physical ones, injuries like failure and rejection. And they too can get worse if we ignore them, and they can impact our lives in dramatic ways. And yet, even though there are scientifically proven techniques you could use to treat these kinds of psychological injuries, we don't. It doesn't even occur to us that we should. Oh, you're feeling depressed? Just shake it off. It's all in your head. Can you imagine saying that to somebody with a broken leg? Oh, just walk it off. It's all in your leg. It is time we close the gap between our physical and our emotional health. It's time we made them more equal, more like twins. But that gap is really wide. Just last week, I was talking about emotion, and this one man waves his hand dismissively at me and says, "Yeah, I don't believe in feelings." That's what he said, "I don't believe in feelings." Now, this man was a senior executive in a financial institution, and he said it during the first few minutes of a couples therapy session with his wife sitting right next to him, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. So I did what most psychologists do when they're caught by surprise. I repeated the statement in the form of a question. "You don't believe in feelings?" And he said, "Well, I realize some people have them, but they shouldn't matter. They're not real." Not real. You know, like unicorns or aliens. So I turned to his wife and I said, "Did you know your husband didn't believe in feelings?" And she said, "No, but that explains a lot." So that's what I did. I laughed. I laughed really hard. I laughed so hard that she started laughing. And then she laughed so hard that he did not start laughing at all. He looked rather displeased, so I said to him, "What, you don't believe in laughter either?" So then I saw him do this, so I said, "Are you annoyed?" He said, "Yes, I'm very annoyed." I said, "Well, great, that's one feeling you believe in. Now let's talk about all the others and how they're impacting your marriage." The thing is, this man wasn't cruel, but he was blind to his wife's emotional pain. We're really good at recognizing physical pain when we see it, but when it comes to emotional pain, we're all a little bit blind, even psychologists. Speaking of which, my twin brother is also a psychologist. We didn't study together, though. In fact, one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life is move across the Atlantic to get my doctorate in psychology. We were apart for the first time in our lives then, and the separation was brutal for both of us. But while he remained among family and friends, I was alone in a new country. We missed each other terribly, but international phone calls were really expensive then, and we could only afford to speak for 5 minutes a week. When our birthday rolled around, the first one we wouldn't spend together, we decided to splurge, and that week, speak for 10 minutes. I spent the afternoon pacing around my room, waiting for him to call. And waiting. But the phone didn't ring. I assumed, okay, given the time difference, he's out with friends, he'll call later. But he didn't. And I began to realize that after being away for over 10 months, he no longer missed me the way I missed him. I knew he would call in the morning, but that night was one of the saddest and longest nights of my life. I woke up the next morning, I glanced down at the phone, and I realized I had kicked it off the hook when pacing the day before. I leapt out of bed, I put it back on the receiver, and it rang a second later. And it was my brother, and boy was he pissed. Because it had been the saddest and longest night of his life as well. Now, I tried to explain what happened, but he just said, wait, I don't understand. If you saw that I wasn't calling you, why didn't you just pick up the phone and call me? He was right. Why didn't I call him? I didn't have an answer for him then. But I do today, and it's a simple one. Loneliness. Loneliness creates a deep psychological wound, one that distorts our thinking and distorts our perceptions. It makes you believe those around you care much less than they actually do. It makes you really hesitant to reach out because why set yourself up for rejection and heartache if your heart is already aching more than you can stand? I was in the grips of real loneliness back then, but I was surrounded by people all day, so it never occurred to me. But loneliness is defined purely subjectively. It depends solely on whether you feel emotionally or socially disconnected from those around you, and I did. There is a lot of research on loneliness, and all of it is horrifying. Loneliness won't just make you miserable, it will kill you. I'm not kidding. Chronic loneliness increases your likelihood of an early death by 14%. 14%. It causes high blood pressure, high cholesterol. It suppresses the function of your immune system. Scientists have concluded that chronic loneliness poses as significant a risk for your long-term health and longevity as cigarette smoking. Now, cigarette packs come with warnings saying this can kill you, but loneliness doesn't. That's why it's so important we prioritize our psychological health, because you can't treat an emotional wound if you don't even know you're injured. And I didn't. I was blind. Our ignorance of emotional wounds and how to treat them are costing us a very high price, and not just in misery. They are impacting our ability to function in our jobs and in our personal lives. You see, we have a finite amount of intellectual resources, of brain power, and emotional distress of any kind takes up a huge chunk of it. Studies have found that just imagining being lonely causes significant drops in IQ scores. Failing at one task makes it much more difficult to think creatively at another. Brooding and ruminating can cause problems with problem solving. Guilty feelings make it very difficult to concentrate and focus, and heartbreak at any age can render us entirely non-functional. Now, none of these are mental illnesses. They are common experiences of daily life. Applying emotional first aid techniques to these kind of wounds can ease our emotional distress and restore our functioning. So why don't we know that? Why is this something we don't talk about? Yes, mental illness comes with stigma. It's unfortunate, but it does. But why are we so embarrassed to admit our feelings get hurt because our colleagues went to lunch without us? Why are we so embarrassed to say that our eyes are puffy because our beloved cat died and we've been crying? The answer is simple. We're afraid. We're afraid that admitting those kinds of things will make us be perceived as weak, as lacking in emotional strength, so we don't talk about it. But that fear reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of what emotional strength actually is. In fact, our entire notion of emotional strength is completely distorted because it is based almost entirely on what we see in movies and on television, on the tough guy image, like Liam Neeson in the movie Taken. For those who haven't seen it, Neeson plays an ex-operative of sorts, and his adult daughter calls him while hiding under the bed because she is about to be abducted by sex traffickers and sold into slavery. And sure enough, the bad guys come in and drag her away screaming, and then they take the phone, and Liam Neeson, still on the phone, warns them, cool and tough. He warns them that they should be worried, he says, because I have a very particular set of skills. That's a famous line from the film. I have a very particular set of skills. Well, he might, but expressing his feelings is not one of them. His daughter just got carried away screaming. He might never see her again. Would it have made him any less heroic if he said the same lines, but with a tear running down his cheek? Would he be any less brave if the sound of his daughter's desperate screams caused him a lump in his throat, just a lip tremble? But that's the distortion we have. We believe that emotional strength is not about how you manage your emotion, it's about not having any. And I'm sorry, Taken is not an action movie, it's science fiction. Expressing emotional distress when emotionally distressing things happen doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Emotional strength is not about your tear ducts. It's not about your reactions in the moment even that much. It's about how you bounce back from setbacks, from challenges. It's about resilience. I recently worked with 2 entrepreneurs in New York City who invested their heart and soul into their startups, and both were seeking a round of funding, and both failed. When Sally got the news, she burst into tears. She was devastated. When Amanda got the news, she was calm. She spoke to her staff. She thanked them. Now, if I asked you, well, which of these women is emotionally stronger, you would say, well, Amanda, because she didn't cry. The next day, Sally got up and started working on her next big idea. And she kept at it for 3 years until it succeeded. Amanda was so devastated by what happened, she never did anything entrepreneurial ever again. So now, who is emotionally stronger? Well, Sally. Despite crying in the moment, she bounced back. She had the resilience. She was the one who was stronger. We have to change our ideas about emotions, about how they function. We really have to start prioritizing our psychological health, and we can't do that unless we're able to talk about emotional distress without fear, unless we're able to open our eyes to emotional pain, that of others and our own. You know, 100 years ago, people began practicing personal hygiene, and life expectancy rates rose by over 50% in a matter of decades. I believe our quality of life can rise just as much if we began practicing emotional first aid and prioritizing our psychological health. And you will not have to wait decades to see the results. You will see them immediately. Our physical health and our emotional health are like twins. As a psychologist, but especially as a twin, I am urging you, treat them equally. Thank you.